Welcome to the Week 6 Spreadsheet Beta and the Security Market Line, Problem 7. In this problem, we use the previous 6 problems, and now we rederive the equation of the security market line using the real market portfolio we found in problems 5 and 6 instead of using the S&P 500. How do we do it? Well, the first thing you've got to understand is we use the proportions of X and the corresponding proportion of Y that we found using GoalSeek in problem 5 and 6. So you can see C90 corresponds to this cell, which takes this cell here. So, and that in the pink corresponds to the equivalent S&P 500 envelope portfolio. Same risk as the S&P 500, but of course a different and higher expected mean return. So that's where that proportion of X comes from. And what it tells us is that the envelope portfolio that we're actually interested in, that gives us the 0.1896 annualized risk equivalent to the S&P 500, has negative 1.45 in proportion in envelope portfolio X and positive 2.45 proportion of the portfolio in Y. And that's that information here. What we do then is we multiply each of these proportions by the corresponding proportion of X and proportion of Y, corresponding to each of the cells. So C75, if we go up, is the weighting of AMR in X. C76 is the weighting of the next stock in portfolio X and so on. So effectively, what we're doing is we are calculating here, we're multiplying the proportion of X and then multiplying it again by the proportion of AMR in X. And we're doing the same for Y. And when we do that, we can see in the yellow we're getting the new weights of our new correct market portfolio. And then in step 2, what we're doing is we're just multiplying the returns in 1974 from each of the stocks, each of the companies, by our new weights for our new market portfolio. And we're doing that year by year to get our new market portfolio returns. And once we do that, we calculate our expected returns and our expected betas, but now the betas are relative not to the S&P 500, as it was way up here when we did the equivalent exercise here, where we use S&P 500, but now our betas are relevant or relative to our new market portfolio here in green, which we've just calculated. And we get our expected means and expected betas for each and every one of our companies, AMR, BS, all the way to UK. And then what we do is we calculate our intercept, we calculate our slope, and we calculate our R squared, and we now find a perfect R squared, an R squared of 1. In other words, what this means is, using our new market portfolio, which is indeed an envelope portfolio, we can explain, using our explanatory or our independent variable beta, we can explain 100% of the variability in the expected or mean returns for each of the stocks. In other words, we now have a perfect model. So this confirms that using the S&P 500 was providing us with the poor explanatory power of the beta model initially. And by rectifying that and finding a market portfolio, not the S&P 500, but a market portfolio on the envelope, we now explain 100% of the variation in the relationship between the beta and the market portfolio, which is a good result, the result that we're hoping for. That's it for this week, and I'll see you next week.